We've taken a little different flavor this time. We've got an early career professor, so stay tuned for her wisdom. Hey Elizabeth, welcome. I've been looking forward to talking to you since you are also a friend of mine.
Hi, Kate. I'm so excited to do this. This will be so fun. You know, I always enjoy interactions, and I think we're going to talk about some important things today. So,
Yeah. So your early career, and this isn't something we've had on here before. So tell us why you picked being a professor and how you got there.
so I picked to be a professor so I could work with students mostly. I love science, and science is really important to me. It's always been important. But really, you can do science in so many different places, but there's very few where you can have true impact on like the next generation of students, both in research and in teaching. And so, how I became a professor is kind of long winded. We'll make it brief. I was in college and I was picking a major, and I was like, chemistry majors make an amount of money. There's lots of jobs. The government will always pay chemists, and the class sizes are small, so the competition will be low. You know, this is what 18-year-old Elizabeth decided. So I was originally going to go to med school, and I started doing a lot of volunteer work with hospice. And I realized through this process that like I could handle death and the realities and difficulties of life. But like physicians make mistakes, and those mistakes can kill people. And like that was something I was going to have a personally hard time with. So then I pivoted pretty hard and was like, I'm just going to get a job after undergrad. Like I have enough in student loans anyway. Like, I like the education thing, but like the professors are all white men. Like that's not, I'm not going to be a scientist. I can't be a professor. These are not the things that are open to me. And then I met Taraj Saluki after working like an overnight shift at Target. And I was covered in shampoo and conditioner. And he's like, what are you doing? And I was like, well, you see, I'm working at Target to like afford tuition and stuff, and also like a place to live. And he's like, but you make like straight A's, don't you? And I was like, yeah. And he's like, is this your only gig? And I'm like, no, I got two other ones. And he goes, I'm like, this one's overnight, so I could actually go to 8 a.m.s in the morning, right? And he's like, okay. He's like, did you realize I worked overnight at like a milk farm or like a milk factory? Is this why you're bringing this up? And I was like, no, I had no idea. And I was like, that's pretty like cool though. Like, so it's not just like me.
I have to
And he's like,
interrupt
oh
you
no. Yeah.
because I worked overnight as well at
Yeah.
JCPenney in the stock room. So I get you.
That's just the most convenient when you're trying to actually go to classes, like, but you still need to fit in like a 40-hour week somewhere
Yep.
or 30s or whatever. And so then he's like, well, have you considered graduate school? And I go, no, I don't think I can afford more student loans. I barely am making this work, and I don't think another 4 or 5 years is going to do it. And he looks at me and he goes, they pay you to go to school. And he's like, this looks surprising to you. And I was like, yeah. And he goes, why don't you know this? And I'm like, I work at Target. Like, why would I know this? And so lo and behold, he's like, why don't you work in my lab? You're a really good student. He and I published two papers together. He helped me. He really mentored me in you can go to graduate school. You can go be a professor if you really want to. Like, here's some female professors in mass spectrometry you've never heard of, but like they clearly exist. They have Wikipedia pages. And so like that was a really influential point in my life where I pivoted a hard left, and I went down this path that was pretty unknown. And then I went to graduate school, University of Illinois, with Jonathan Sweedler. He's one of my scientific heroes because, and I never appreciated this fully until like last year. In the middle of his being an assistant professor, he pivoted to mass spectrometry. He's a spectroscopist by training. And that was like super cool to me as a graduate student. I'm like, whoever is that bold, like that's who I want to study with. I then went to Vanderbilt and learned imaging from Richard Caprioli. And so these people are all incredible scientists. And so I was excited to then go to University of Davis, where I could really impact student life and impact students who have very similar backgrounds to me, who maybe don't know that this is an option for them, but also have like the I stand on the shoulders of giants, right? Like there's few people who are blessed enough to stand in the same room as Richard and Jonathan, and I'm very blessed for that.
I love that. I mean, everybody's journey is so unique, and when you hear it, you're still able to go, "Whoa." I had some of those moments. And so I love that you're telling that here. So let's talk about being a professor. I know that you had a very intentional outlook going into this. You don't have a group that has the layers of postdocs built in, senior students. So your life's a little harder.
Oh, absolutely. And not to say that like some of my more senior colleagues don't have it hard. I think the difficulty looks very different. One, my lab grew very quickly, and this was not intentional necessarily on my part. So I took 3 students my first year, and then my second year, uh, a lot more students wanted to join. I ended up picking 3 because they were just super compelling, and it's hard to say no to students, especially when they're like, I think this is what I want. Like, this is my whole career trajectory, and this answers it. And it's like, okay. And then it's like this last year we're recruiting again, and it's like, okay, I'm going to take another 2 students. I inherited one from another lab, and so now I'm sitting at 9 graduate students, and I've been here for 2 years and like 6 months. And so it's funny being like a postdoc and also like the PI and then also the senior graduate student and also trying to get grants because you have no money and then also trying to learn to teach and then also being a young woman, you inherently get more student emotional support that you have to give. It's the same for minorities, right? Like at some point, we carry a disproportionate amount of the mental wellness of the department. So I ended up being analytical advisor on top of that. So like this week alone, I've had to make like 3 reports because of sensitive student issues. Whereas like if you look at my corollaries at the same positions, they're not having that kind of emotional burden. But this is why I became a professor because I know that these situations exist, right? And you can either handle them positively or you can handle them with difference. And I strongly believe that a PhD should be hard for the right reasons. And so how I go about managing is I give my students a lot of autonomy. I recognize that being the senior graduate student and the senior postdoc and the PI, there's not enough hours in the day for that alone. So I give my students a lot of airway to fail, and then I teach them that that's okay. And so instead of when they break something, going and being mad about it, saying let's go fix it. So I've taught them how to solder and how to like fix glass and how to cut it, like all of these things. Because when you're frugal, which I have been like my whole life, right? Like that can apply to the lab too. And so I'm teaching them to be creative in how they solve problems, and then I set the expectation that we're a lab, there's not really to be competition. Everyone helps each other. And so like I've seen this play out positively so many times. Like one of my students is actually pregnant. And so, when she has morning sickness, all of the other students make sure like her projects are still going. If something needs to thaw so she can leave for a minute, like that gets thawed. And like this plays out like someone has an emergency or someone has a death in the family. Like when everyone's truly working together, all of a sudden it's slightly not as overwhelming. You actually have people that will step in and they will do just as good of a job for you as they will for someone else. And so then it makes it worth it. And then you go, I have 100 hats. Some will fall and that's okay. The important ones stay on, like me being human and like empathetic towards students and helping them. Those ones stay on. They're underneath all the layers of like, oh, also you need to like write budgets and stuff. Those ones you can get help with if you ask.
All right, I'm going to throw a statistic at you, and I just want your bold reaction to this. There are only about 135 R1 schools in the country. What's your thought about that? What's your response to that? What's your feeling that you're in that situation?
I actually didn't realize it was that small. Um, I think like everyone else deals with imposter syndrome. And so I kind of, when I was applying to faculty positions, was like, I'm not going to get any of these but I'm going to try. And then if I end up anywhere, you know, like I'm still going to do science, it just might look differently. The benefits of an R01 or an R1 institution is that you can afford a nice instrument and have it be in your lab. But that's still, I actually don't know how to respond to because I don't feel good enough, right? But I know I go to work and I try my damnedest every day. So hopefully I
So
get
let
some
it make you feel
distinction.
good. I mean, remember
Yeah,
that in the morning. You are there. You have made it.
it's so crazy. Like I still can't believe I have this job and it's been 2.5 years. Like,
And you've done a
and I have
lot so
students.
far.
Yeah, it's crazy. We're even planning like a conference at UC Davis for mass spectrometry imaging. That's something I didn't think I was going to do 6 months ago. Like, and we're pushing the boundaries scientifically with students who have never even remotely heard of mass spectrometry half the time. Like, it's very fun. I'm very lucky to have this job.
All right, so you brought up two things that I think we can continue with. So, what are the questions important to you in science? Why do you see them as being underevaluated? Kind of how you look at a lot of things.
So I've always been a fan of the underdog in science and like in everything in life. Right? It just makes life more interesting. I also fundamentally believe in diversity, both in the workforce and in how we see life. So if you think about a tissue is composed of a diverse array of cells. And if we think about like really cool organs like the brain, for many decades we only focused on one of these cell types and said like that was the one dude that was doing stuff. And then it turns out like multiple decades have gone by and it's like, oh no, it's not that one dude, it's all of these other cells that are actually just as important. They just look a little different. And so what I'm really compelled by is how do we take things that or concepts that matter to us in daily life and then can we find those corollaries in science? And the answer is absolutely. I think that that's true. And then diversity in cell type is something that's becoming more important in spatial biology. But what's still really underappreciated is diversity in the chemical space. And so, like, Peggy Angel and Richard Drake are some of my heroes, and they've been championing glycans with Carlito, right? Like in two different spaces, but like that's a very neglected chemical species. Lipids are horribly neglected. It's still people to this day, like we have a paper that we fed animals Western diet versus high fat diet, and then saw like neurological changes that were different based on brain region. In fact, like your hippocampus, which controls memory, doesn't change at all until you actually start feeding an animal a diet for like many months. Like there's some resistance to change. And like a lot of the reviewers still were like, of course, if you fed an animal a fat diet, the lipids are going to change. And it's like, yes, but which ones? Because it's not all of them. And also, if you feed them like a high sugar diet, the lipids also change. So, like, I think lipids also are chronically underrepresented and understood. But when you think about things like vesicle transmission, which is what we believe like metastasis from cancer like originates by, that's all lipid mediated. Like how astrocytes and glia actually like consume and change neuron process growth to enable memory and cognition, that's all lipid mediated and we have no idea what it is. And so those are just two examples where we've completely ignored these chemical spaces where I think they're actually going to be super important. So what drives me is usually some clinical applications. um Not because there's not other important fields, but it's usually something that my students are passionate about. So I ask them coming in, are there any things that you're passionate about? If you could solve one problem in the world, what would you solve? And usually, especially in the clinical space, spatial biology actually plays a role in this. And so we can get close or find a corollary. And the students then are motivated, not just scientifically, but like all of a sudden they found something that could be a life mission. And that might pivot later. But the clinical space is both intellectually very complex, it's very diverse. Diversity plays a role on multiple scales. And we'd even talk about like cells are one thing, but organ systems are another, and how are these organs interacting with one another? That's also honestly ignored in many spaces. Like how do, if you feed someone a drug, what's the multi-organ impact of that? So there's lots of open questions, and then it's something everyone, especially the students, can get a handle on and find important. And it's really cool to marry people's ideas and have them think, if you had an infinite money and infinite time, what would you choose to solve? And that's a very powerful question for a student that they've often not thought about. But that's true, right? You have a whole career that you can spend solving a problem, and that's really cool.
So I feel like you've actually made your own mission a little bit more difficult because you're letting your students have a say in this and able to pick some of their trajectory. But eventually you have to weave all this together. So, how do you feel about that? And how hard has that been?
Oh, it's been super hard. I give talks actually more recently where they're like traditional hour talks where you're like the seminar speaker for a department, which still is crazy to me. I actually went back to Baylor. It had been almost exactly to the day a decade, and I gave their opening seminar. And that was crazy to me to be in the same auditorium I remember watching seminars. And it was filled to the brim. And I'm like, I study neurological diseases and also cancer. And did you know plastics are bad for you? It sounds very eclectic. Now, I usually announce at the beginning that it's eclectic, but I also make the comment that while these seem very different spaces, and in many regards they are, there's lots of corollaries from space to space. So if you think of Alzheimer's as an example, one of the things we study in the spatial biology context, and hopefully this paper actually comes out soon. And I'm not the first person to do this. Jonathan has a paper on it, but we have these plaques, right? And neuroscientists have hypothesized and kind of known that there's trafficking of cells to this plaque interface. And that causes some of these cells, they're called microglia, to get activated. And activated microglia are like an activated immune cell. They go and phagocytose everything. And that's problematic in the brain where you have functional neurons, right? So the plaque itself may or may not be symptomatic, but because you have an activated immune cell, they travel to the plaque and then change molecularly. So we're studying that interface. And we're studying this interface as a function of distance because, it takes cells a while to actually travel, and they change molecularly as they travel because it's not like they have legs and they move, right? Like there's some kind of molecular feature that's allowing them to actually get closer to this plaque feature. So we're studying that, both what cells are doing that, what cells are enabling that, and how does the chemistry change to allow that, again, at multiple distances from all of these features on the order of thousands of plaques in like all of these human and murine tissues. So then the question becomes, how does that relate to cancer? And it actually is very similar, right? Like in cancer, you have a giant tumor that also has immune cells that go to the interface. Now, the size scales are slightly different. Your plaque is on the order of like 100 microns. A tumor is usually measured in millimeters, unless you're me, in which case it's measured much larger than that. Jokes aside, I had a 12-pound ovarian tumor this year. So that was also fun to throw on another hat of how do you deal with your health on top of this. But jokes aside, like the scales are very different, but the mechanisms are actually quite similar. They're not microglia that, go to a tumor in your liver, but they are activated immune cells that then phagocytose other cells, and that makes you extra sick. And so that also has a spatial component. And again, the scales are slightly different, but the computational methods are very similar. And then, so there's some like connectedness that actually brings some of these projects together. If we take my most diverse one, which is studying the effects of plastic on organisms, you know, a plaque and plastic are compositionally very, very different, but like it's still a chunk of something that your your immune system's responding to. And so it's very cool actually. While these are quite diverse, a lot of the computational methods are similar. And actually, a lot of the concepts are similar. And my guess and my hypothesis is about 10 years from now, we're going to find out that some of the mechanisms are actually quite similar. Because immune systems are complicated, but they're, especially the initial ones, are made to do one solid object, or like they have one objective, and that's to recognize foreign objects. And so it's going to be interesting to see, can we actually pull resources and strategies from these different communities, and will they actually work? And so it also makes it fun for the students because they see the breadth of science. So I take a lot of first generation students that maybe don't even know that you could be a scientist. So not only am I training them that yes, you can be a scientist, but also this is the breadth of science and this is what you can do with mass spectrometry. It's not just you can look at a tissue, it's you can look at all of these diseases using the same equipment and the same general strategy. And then you specialize as you go and as you move from project to project. So very eclectic, but there is actually things that bind them together, and it's fun to figure that out too. Um, it's a lot of post editing in my slides of we figured this out. Oh, it actually applies to a bunch of things.
Okay, so you've shared you have a huge heart, and I can tell that because you clearly have the good kind of ambition because you're empowering others as you move along. You have scientific idealism. You want it to have an impact on, the people that might have a favorable outcome from this. And you have personal challenges. Thank you as well for sharing that because not everyone would be willing to. What boundaries have you put in place? Have you thought about that? Is that something you have to do?
Oh, absolutely. So I grew up with very poor boundaries. I've had very poor boundaries as a result of my childhood. And so where this kind of started was I realized in graduate school that boundaries were important. And also like I did not have the skill set that most people do coming out of childhood. And so I started this journey. This is going to sound dumb, but I read a book called Boundaries by Dr. Henry Cloud. He's a PhD, so I said, seems legit. And then it made me think about it because I figure I strongly believe in growth mentality, and that means you should be moderately stressed at any given moment, and stress makes you grow, and that's ultimately good. But when stress becomes too much, that's a problem. And so it's not judgmentally looking at yourself and seeing these are the issues that I've had. These are making me non ideal or inefficient. And then hitting them head on and saying, okay, what is actually the ultimate reason behind some of these issues? Mine usually is boundaries. And it's because I'm very empathetic. Because of the things we've already kind of talked about, young women tend to get more emotional burden thrown at them. And it's really hard when a student's crying in your office to say, I'm sorry that you're the fifth one today. Like, I actually don't emotionally have it in me anymore to deal with this. When, you know, students don't just cry in your office because they're having the best day of their life, right? Like, even my minor crying in my office is severe often, especially for some of these students who, like one student, she actually, her stipend, which isn't very much, is used to pay the tuition of her sister so she could come to America to study, right? Like some students support their family back in a different country. So it's not like these students are the ones whose parents are paying their way, they're paying their rent. Often it's the reverse. So these are very real life problems. And so over the years, I've gotten better at delegating, both in things that like make sense to delegate. Like I will have students take some meetings if I cannot be there. Like meetings that apply to them, they would go either way. But if it's one that like they can take notes on, or if I'm going to be 15 minutes late, they can run the meeting. And I've trained my students how to run meetings. I actually, even if I'm there, have them run the meeting because I think that's a good career training step. So delegating is important, and that includes emotional delegation. There are days where I physically cannot hear another story where I'm going to have to make another report. That's not healthy for me. And frankly, I go to therapy every week, and if I hit my max on Monday, therapy's on Friday. Like, there's a lot of gaps between Monday and Friday I have to make work. And so I delegate to like the mental health resources. I actually have a flow chart in my office that is organized by issue, whether it's like an LGBTQ issue, and then it subjects or like it goes down to like trans helplines or queer helplines, so on and so forth, right? Or women's health, is it pregnancy related? And I have all of these numbers organized. And so sometimes students will come to me asking how to help their undergrads that they're teaching. So I give them this flow chart, and that helps them feel empowered. And that's already delegating. It's making another ally in the space instead of me having to go there and comforting the student directly. I'm empowering other people to do this. And then also I have the numbers where if a student's in my office and I'm not equipped to deal with the issue, which often is actually the case, while students may trust me, like I'm not the expert in domestic abuse, right? Like, and so, but there are. And so then it becomes, how do I carefully delegate this to someone who is an expert? And then when do you actually call it as an enough? And then knowing where your allies in the department are and then connecting them in, right? And so I also take care of my mental health through therapy. I make sure I make time for myself with my partner. I have dogs. I play a lot of board games. I have a second home where I go and hang out with people. There's funny stories because students will see me there because it's a retail store, but we can talk about that differently. And so I'm not perfect at it. I've gotten much better than I used to be, but I think the key is learning how do you delegate, and then how do you feel comfortable delegating the things that are actually super important to you. But knowing that if you run empty, you're now like that's the last person you're going to help, and you'll become bitter and all these other things. And burnout is real, and I see this in a lot of my colleagues, both at Davis and elsewhere. You start to lose empathy if you don't really have good boundaries. But boundaries also can look different from person to person. I think that's the other key I've learned is what works for, say, Jonathan is not going to work for me. It's because we have very different experiences, and that's okay. And so learning what works for you by trial and error, run the experiment is what I tell my students. You know, you'll find out that sometimes meditation works, doesn't work for me. Run that experiment. Take the data, there you got feedback, try again, right? So I see life as a giant experiment too, and that's also
Yeah.
been kind of fun.
Yeah. Yeah, and I'll share with you, that crying thing, it doesn't necessarily go away later in your career. I've cried at my boss and I'm not ashamed of it. When your emotions get to the point, when your frustration gets to a certain point, you show that differently. Some people show it by yelling, some people show it by being defensive, some people show it by shedding some tears. It's fine.
Yeah, and learning how to help a vast array of students who have these different mechanisms, and then helping them realize that that's actually their response to
Yeah.
stress is
Yeah.
also, it's helpful. If you see everything as like there is a solution, it also helps a lot too.
Yeah.
Like, and none of these things are fault based, right? Like,
Yep.
um, I used to feel a lot of guilt when I couldn't do something. Now I try to look at it as like, yeah, but I did all these other things, and that's still
Yeah.
a lot.
Yeah. All right. You also mentioned that you play games, and I play games too. So tell me your favorite, and I'll tell you my favorite.
So I hate this question. It's like when people ask me what's your favorite movie, like I don't
That's
know.
fair.
Now,
How about your top three that you play regularly?
yeah. So I brought one. I can't even. It's in my top 10. It's called Potion Explosion. It's Bejeweled, but it's tactile, and it's also very chemistry. So you got the crazy generic white wild hair professor in the center.
Yeah.
And the gist of it is that, actually, the back shows it quite nicely. You have a tray of different chemicals that are different colors, and then you pick them one at a time. And then, just like Bejeweled, when you pick one up, if colors of or marbles of the same color touch, you get those as well. And then you use it to craft different mystical formulas, and then that you use it to get more chemicals. It's quite fun. I play that with lots of kids actually, and like my students love it. I love it. So it spans a nice age range. I also like more complicated games like um, Architects of the West Kingdom, which is a worker placement game. Where my favorite part is that you can like send other people's players to jail. So some poor players like, I'm gonna try to collect stones so I could build this castle, and then I go, you're gonna go to jail. And then I rob every one of their players. I don't ever win, but it's very fun to let someone to throw everyone's people in jail. So often I play games with the intent of not to win, but to either like have to frustrate people like my partner who plays with me. We play a disproportionate of games together, or like some of my students, I'll be like just intentionally frustrating because it's fun. And then they'll do it back, and then all of a sudden, a 20-minute game takes 3 hours because no one's actually trying to win anymore.
It's about the
Um,
community, it's not just playing the game.
Absolutely. And then my last recommendation is Rhino Hero. That was the game I actually tried to find this morning, and I think it's because it's in my car. It's a game for children. It's like paper stacking, and you build a giant tower, and whoever knocks it over loses. So it's like reverse Jenga, but it's got a little rhino character that you have to randomly put on some of the tiles. By far, that game I could play for hours because you can be a real dirtbag. Because the intent is to like build it up straight because it's for children. It's supposed to be nice, and like often I'll build it at an angle intentionally, and then Brian will try to build it back so it actually can get tall, and we'll put multiple games together so we can make like giant towers. It's quite fun. So much like life, sometimes you don't play by the rules.
Yep. Yep. My husband used to own a game and bookstore. So when we moved and it closed down, it's like a lot of the stock moved with us. So there are easily 50 to 100 games sitting down in my living room. I always seem to choose the ones that like poke at my creativity, make me
Oh
think
yeah,
about things a little bit differently. Because my husband's a PhD in English, so very very different, and I love that mismatch.
is it a match? I think that actually sounds like a match. Like
I don't
sometimes.
know. When he speaks in poet language, sometimes I'm like, those words don't go together. So,
What's your favorite game then? Because I think your living room looks like mine. Like I had to
yeah,
find a place in my house where you couldn't just see stacks of board games.
yeah, yeah. At the moment, because it changes, at the moment, I need ones that just let me decompress and don't take as much thought. So Azul is one of my
Oh yeah,
favorites. There's a little bit of strategy, there's some color, there's some lightheartedness to it. So that's what we've been doing a lot lately.
that's. Have you played Sagrada before?
No, I don't know that one. A lot of the ones you mentioned, I don't know, which is also awesome because I'm going to look them up.
So Sagrada has a legacy game where it's actually like you're making stained glass windows with colored pencils. It's
Ooh.
very Azul like. So Sagrada is somewhat Azul light. It predates Azul. I don't
Okay.
actually like Sagrada itself that much. Like I'll play periodically and it's fun, but it's not one I can binge. I could binge Azul. But the legacy game is really cool. So you are the theme is like you're an artist that goes over the centuries, and like it's a family of artists, and then they're constructing these beautiful glass stained windows in I think Italy. And so then you draft the pieces of the window, and then you have like colored pencils that you draw in, and so you score based on how dynamic your stained glass window is and stuff. But it's very artsy. It's very fun. But it's still a board game with a coloring book. The best
Yeah.
kind.
Yeah. I wish we had like credits on these because I could just roll the credits as all the games that we love and, 100 suggestions of you need to do something for Christmas.
Here's your shopping list.
Exactly. Yeah. All right. Well, I think it's great talking to you as always. I don't know if you have any last pieces of wisdom or, anything else you want to say.
So how I try to end these things is actually with like my mission statement. And it's a mission statement I've borrowed from smarter people who've come up with it. But early on, I was told by a teacher that one of the best ways to live life is to be mission forward. It makes you have a reason really to get up in the morning, to really be cognizant and very exact about what you're doing and what, you know, are all of the pieces and time that you're spending actually contributing to your mission and making sure that that actually makes sense. So the mission I chose a while ago is be the person you needed when you were younger. It was written by Siddiqui. And I really, that resonates to me. And I think that's why I get called to being a professor is I want to be the professor I needed when I was a graduate student or an undergrad or we have high schoolers that come in or middle schoolers. And so that's the thought or the piece that I'll leave with you and the audience is be the person you needed when you were older and see what that kind of brings out in your day.
That doesn't necessarily have to be someone who is smarter than you. That could just be someone who is at a different place that day. So
That's
don't
true.
don't put yourself down.
That's fair. They
All right.
probably actually like are a poet or something. They probably have some nice background where they can construct words that are beautiful.
I get that. All right. Well, thank you. Great talking as always.
Absolutely. Nice to see you, Kate.
Yep. I hope you found this episode empowering. You never know where you're going to find inspiration, and I think this one in particular will make you think about some things a little bit more deeply.